Right. All right, everyone. Welcome to another lunchtime chat, RELC lunchtime chat. 2 weeks ago, we had a really good discussion, and we were talking about um, some of the things associated with how we've intermingled and became, in my estimate, more American.
Mhm.
Um, Things around genealogy and such, and attached to that, in a way, is what we're going to unpack today, economics, because when this was a slave society, and we were talking about the interactions amongst the races and that produced offspring, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the economics that are attached to that is if you looked at the wheels and you looked at some of the ways that uh, the courts interacted with how things would be passed on to people, um, there were at at that point black people who made claims to their fathers' estates and such. So we all have a tremendous understanding of what it means to start out with a little
Mm.
help in life. Um, but today we're going to be talking to a financial wizard. I'm being facetious, but a financial person who is very knowledgeable of that world. Demetrius Ponder, and today's title was "Moving On Up: The Reality of Economic Disparity in America." So Demetrius is someone I actually met through Lisa McMillan, who you all have probably interacted with in some way, shape, form, or another, and she's a great presence on Grown Folks Business, my night time show on Thursdays. But Demetrius has worked with me in an endeavor to raise awareness to my entrepreneurial um, attempt with Race to Win, which is along the lines of what I do here in the RELC space. Try to elevate conversations and progress on matters concerning America's uh, issue with better understanding its history and
Mm.
becoming more authentic for it and progressing on this social construct of race. Attached to that is the economic piece. As far as just central to the Black American experience, there was this large population that came out of slavery, having no foundation of to base any progress upon because hey, they had been free labor, they had been chattel slaves, and it was understood early on that land at that point, this is an agricultural society, was very important. Um, Means to farm were very important, and those things were attached to the desires of this newly free group of people. They had the skills.
Mm.
The skills were there. The skills had in some points came from West Africa with them, but having the means, having the understanding of the system in which they existed, a system at which they had been property in. Um, so even it was understood to the point that Field Order 15 was issued by Tecumseh Sherman in Atlanta, understanding that allocating land for these newly free people in Florida, Georgia, that area of the South um, was needed and necessary. There were negotiations, there were talks, there was just an understanding that you had to have some type of base, and our understanding today, financial base to work from. So I say all of that to say that, of course, it's applicable to any group of people in this country when you get to present day. But I'm bringing in the Black American experience specifically because there's been a detrimental um, journey attached to real enrichment and a true solid ground to work from, where you can make mistakes, where you don't have to worry about the perils of this decision costing you everything, or some emergency that might leave you high and dry. There's a different type of peril in that experience. So without further ado, I'm going to allow Mr. Ponder to come in and tell us about his self and his journey. And I've learned a little bit about it, but I wanted him to unpack it further. Why did you even get to this point of desiring to be involved in economics at basically the highest levels, being a decision maker, being someone that could tell that person that's heard a million no's, yeah, I can do that for you.
Mm.
So without further ado, Mr. Demetrius Ponder.
Man, thank you, bro. You set the bar pretty high for me. So, but yeah, I'm gonna tell my story, man. I'm gonna tell, a little bit about me and why I do what I do. So, I'm a 20-year banker, been in banking for about 20 years. Originally from Atlanta, Georgia, moved to Greensboro about 22 years ago. A company that hired me out of school. I'm a product of HBCU. Went to Clark Atlanta University. All my folks are HBCU folks, in particular Atlanta University folks. So Morehouse, Morris Brown. My parents both went to Morris Brown. My dad was a basketball player at Brown. My grandmother went through the Atlanta University Center, got her doctorate. All the women in my family, like historically, Black women, highly educated, master's degrees. My mom has 3 degrees. I mean, everybody just went through the AU Center. My family, we were friends of the civil rights leaders. We lived across the street from Ralph David Abernathy, King's best friend. I had a uncle that was shot at Ebenezer when King's mother was shot. She was playing the organ. He was a deacon on the front row. We moved in and out. We lived in a historic neighborhood, Collier Heights in Atlanta, which was where Cynthia McKinney and Herman Russell, which was a Black builder in Atlanta, lived. A lot of the Black leaders lived in that community. And so I got to see firsthand, not only, Black excellence, right? Black people be successful coming out of that civil rights movement in Atlanta. People call Atlanta Wakanda for a reason. It moves a little different, but it's because it's like a lot of other Black communities that were self-contained and self-supportive historically, whether it's, your Wilmingtons, your Charlestons, your Rosewoods, your Tulsas, you had that community in Atlanta that came out of that movement that went through that Atlanta University Center together, and they just chose to stick together and thrive together. So that dollar stayed in that community, that intellectual capital stayed in that community. So I come out of an experience like that. And so went to Clark Atlanta, initially was going to be an engineering major. Had an uncle in Atlanta that owned a business. He was had a computer company. And after my first semester, I was like, I'm an extrovert, I'm not an introvert. Like this whole computer thing didn't seem like it was my jam. So I went to an advisor and she said, "It's not a lot of Black men in finance, accounting, and economics. And since you have a math aptitude, let's look at one of those." So I chose finance. Something about the stock market intrigued me. Something about dealing with numbers really got me excited. So that was my journey. I went on through, came out of school with a degree in finance, went to Chicago for a year, worked for a Japanese connector company as an engineer. And that came through my uncle's business, kind of teaching me that technical engineering background. Used that to get a job out of school, transferred to Greensboro a year after being at that company, and moved into banking. So I went to work for a bank here. Many of you may know BB&T was what it was called initially. Now it's another bank name that I won't name, which is some of the reason why I left there. I was courted by Pinnacle to come here about 2 years ago, and I decided to move after the merger. But my job, man, when I was, first, kind of getting into banking, man, I saw some serious gaps, right? I saw, most of my clients initially, because I was not in East Greensboro, I was operating in Northwest Greensboro when I first came into banking. Didn't look like me. I didn't see anybody in the banking business that looked like me. In my role or other roles, we just weren't existent. And I also saw how banking didn't benefit people that look like me. And so I was given an opportunity in 2007 to move from a bank that I was managing, kind of Northwest Greensboro, to East Greensboro, which is where I spent most of my career, over near A&T. And I realized when I got there, the banking services that were offered were a little bit different, right? So, you're in Northwest Greensboro, you're around people that are affluent, they've got larger houses, larger incomes, better financial situations. To the other side of town, across the track, and those same services weren't offered. I also realized that some of the opportunities for people in the Black part of Greensboro, which was East Greensboro, predominantly African-American, just wasn't, whether it's credit offerings, whether it's, opportunities to talk to investment advisors, opportunities to talk to small business and commercial bankers, right? Those folks weren't in the branches. You were dealing pretty much with transactional bankers. And so I was managing that branch, and I brought that awareness to not only my managers, but the executive management in the bank, because I was able to kind of have exposure to a lot of different people in my banking career, just because I push, man. I'm not a guy that's going to sit back and watch things, and if it's not going the way I want it to go, I'm gonna leave. Like, no, I come from folks that we push, right? We're friends of the movement. We're a part of the movement. We push. So I spent my banking career really just like I wore shoes out walking the streets, man. I'd be in A&T and at Bennett. I'd be in African American churches doing financial literacy. I'd be with the nonprofits talking to people about these things that I knew that there were disparities for Black Americans in this industry. And just like a lot of other industries, right? It's just a systemic thing, right? And so you got, you know, an industry that not only do we not have access to historically, but also there were barriers, whether, you know, whether it came to lending money to us and redlining of our communities, right? These codes, these new letter codes placed on communities. And if you want to, in the Black community, you were a code D, right? So that was a no lend to for lenders. That was a no insure for insurance companies. So I knew those types of things. I knew about legislation that was passed in the 70s, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, that was supposed to eradicate that, and it didn't. And Clinton had to come along in the 90s to almost kind of, you know, poke the policymakers on the shoulder and say, hey, this is actually legislation, and kind of reinstitute it again. And then in 2008, when the downturn happened, you know, Black Americans were the highest foreclosed against, because again, those things that were put into legal, the legal books weren't practiced. So I saw all of that stuff. I saw, you know, average credit scores for Black Americans are in the 500s, you know, and so I couldn't lend money to our people, right? I saw that, you know, and so I saw this stuff, and I was just like, we got. So I pushed. I always pushed. My branch was considered a multicultural branch, the first at the bank, where you had dual language. My hiring practices were to hire people that didn't look like me, even, right? And because at East Greensboro area is not just a heavy African American population, there are a lot of other people that move into the city of Greensboro, and they kind of migrate to the east. So whether it was your people from Asia, the Monyard groups, or your folks, your Hispanic Latino groups. So my branch, I call it the United Nations. You walk in there, and I had employees from El Salvador and from Iran and from Pakistan and from, you know, we had multi-language, you know, multi-ethnic experiences. And that brought some attention to the bank, because again, I started talking about some of the products that we offered. You know, I'm supposed to go into the community with this tool belt or this toolbox and have these tools. But when I show up in my community, I don't have the tools to serve my people. So one of the things that I was a part of helping create was this financial wellness program called Bank on Your Success. And the idea behind that program was that we would go into the places, in particular that African Americans were in, because that was my focus, right? We pitched this to A&T kind of early on. We would go into the places of faith and the educational spaces and take this program, because we know in the Black community, those are the two places where the movement was always in the schools and in the churches, right? I mean, that's just kind of how we are able to get our community active. So I kind of helped develop this program. We take it into A&T was kind of my first place I took it to in schools. There was some churches and some other places in the city. Genesis Baptist on Bessemer was the first church we kind of presented this to. So financial wellness was huge, you know. Also bringing the services that were needed in our communities. Entrepreneurship was a huge thing I talk about. Even now, I work with this chamber downtown, this program called Lunch Greensboro, and it works with entrepreneurs. They send a lot of their Black students to me, and I mentor a lot of those students as they get started in business first couple of years. So like all of that stuff, you know, just again, my background, what I've seen, the way I see the industry has been abusive in some ways. And you think, I mean, the banking system in America is built on the back of Black people, right? I mean, you needed to have a crop, right? And if you know banking history, a lot of banking started with agriculture, right? You know, your crops, you know, you got to have seed to put in the ground. And so there was short-term loans that banks would give to farmers, you know, 30-day loan, 90-day notes, whatever. They put that seed in the ground and they pay those loans off with interest after the crops came and they sold their product. You know, you think about, you know, whether it was, you know, sugar from the cane fields down in Louisiana, Mississippi, to the cotton fields in my state of Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. All of that was banking, man. All that money went into those banks. You got banks now that paid, well, they haven't paid anything, but they acknowledged during the whole heightened 2020, 2021, everybody's trying to, you know, it's a fad. It's a fad now because we see it's now they're pushing against the whole diversity, equity, inclusion models. But all the banks apologizing during that time for their how complicit they were in slavery and post-slavery, even through recent times. So all these industries were created, and mine was insurance. I mean, the slave was more valuable than real estate. And in order to not lose, your asset, that you owned, whether it's because you lost them to them running away, they died because of illness, or you killed them, right? All of that was a part of this thing. So that's my industry. That's why I work, man. I work in an industry that has impacted my people, and I wanted to work from the inside out. I remember when I first went to try to get a job at BB&T, I had a white gentleman tell me, he interviewed me, interviewed well. He said, I really want to hire you, but you're gonna have to shave your facial hair. And at that time, I had my hair was closer to my skin, kind of like yours, Felton, just a kind of well kempt kind of beard. But he doesn't know the history of melanin in our skin and what a razor does to our skin, and so just even those types of things, man. I just saw, sisters have to do stuff different to their hair. They had to hot comb and straighten their hair because, it just wasn't culturally appropriate in the banking space. And so I just was a pusher from the inside. A lot of the reason why I'm at Pinnacle now is because they heard about the work I do in the community, and they didn't have anybody like me. They didn't have any Black bankers. And the lady that hired me was really wanting to see some things change from the inside. And so I'm here now pushing on the inside of this place. So, and I'm not shy about that. I don't apologize about that. I know who I am. I know where we come from. I know when we're brought here, that everything here was this evident now, whether it's music or art and culture and food. The stuff the best stuff in America is stuff that was brought here by us. And so I know that. And because I know that, I walk around my chest out. I know I'm standing on the shoulders of great people. And so that's kind of why, in a long story, why I do what I do and why I'm passionate about it.
Man, I'm appreciative for you sharing that. Context is everything, and I think your why dictates so much about your purposeful journey. Your why is that origin, and that why is all connected. There's a couple of things I want to touch on really quickly. For one, though a lot of people don't know that MLK's mother was assassinated in that church. The man who did it was mentally ill, but yeah, that was another tragedy for the King family that not many people are terribly aware of, and it happened inside of the church that her son once preached at. I want to touch on a couple of things, and I'm going to start this off with a question, but this is not a too different version of our lunchtime chats, but we want a lot of crowd participation. Demetrius is here for your questions. He's definitely desiring to be engaged today, and I'm glad to have him. Something else you mentioned that I think is critically important, that insurance industry that is attached to banking, that is about economics in America. As you stated, man, there were whole insurance policies on slave ships, and in some cases, there was wholesale murder or sinking of a ship just to lay claim to the insurance money. So this is work that is attached to something that it can be traumatic for some people. And in your case, you already mentioned it. You're in the heavy minority in terms of your profession. So I wanted to ask as we begin, and I hope you guys are putting together some questions or having some thoughts to share out. Just raise your hand or give me a signal or just on mic when that time comes. But I want to start us off with this question. Can you talk about the mythology associated with making the exception the rule, primarily for Black Americans, such as yourself? You'll be propped up as the success and the exception, and amplified as if that is a normality when you know better. You know the clients that you serve are still not reflective of your community. And we understand that pockets like Atlanta, Durham, those are microcosms. Those are unique, but we highlight that as a thing that, hey, anybody can do it, when we know that the deck is tremendously stacked against us. Again, this is not about doom and gloom,
Right.
but we talk about financial literacy. If you don't have anything to be financially literate with, what are we actually doing in that case? So if you could talk about some of the fallacies that you've run into and some of the things that you've experienced in your course of work in your profession that kind of elevate that abnormality as if it is the norm.
Yeah, one of the things I say, and it's not very popular in this industry, that the credit score is probably one of the most false ways of determining somebody's ability as a business owner, as an individual, right? So it's just not an arbitrary number, it's this number that's tied to these algorithms. And basically, as bankers, we learn that credit is your character, right? We learn that, and that's drilled into us, man. Character, your character, and we know that character outside of that space is not always reflective of actions and activities, right? So, I tried to, you know, the average credit score for a Black American is 100 points lower than a white American, right? And it basically dictates where you go. When I take a credit application, or a banker takes takes an application for a loan, personal or business, we look at credit first. We don't look at income. We don't look at assets. We don't look at what the person's buying, the collateral. We look at the credit score first. And so, if you looked at those two numbers for a Black and white American, it would tell you a whole bunch of stuff if you just looked at it on the surface, right? That one person's more qualified and more eligible, more capable than another. And I just found, man, that I tried to push against that number all the time and find ways to lend money to people and provide them opportunities based on much more than what a credit score is, just a number. And so I'm an anomaly in this space, right? It's not very many of me walking to your bank branch and find a small business or commercial lender that's Black, or just to doing the investments or the other ancillary services that we offer. So it's just really it's really hard to try to communicate to people. They don't have they don't have relationships. A lot of white Americans don't have relationships with Black people, so they don't get to know us. So there's stereotypes, there are things that they think about us. I've got a young brother who wasn't able to borrow money from my predecessor, Black guy. He's in his 30s. He was a COVID nurse. He made about $300,000 in 2022 just traveling around doing COVID stuff. He wanted to buy a piece of commercial real estate in Danville. Danville's hot because of the casino. So he walked into my former bank with his tax return showing $300,000 in income in 22, but not that same amount in 21. And banks look at numbers. They look at ratios. So their question is this guy going to make the same amount of money in 23, right? The pandemic's kind of on the downside. He's not traveling as a COVID nurse. They didn't want to give him credit for his year of making that kind of money. So I took him, said, look, man, let's have a conversation. So he was buying a piece of commercial real estate from a lady whose husband died. She didn't want to be in that business. The building was $190,000. He had $30,000 to put into it. He had more than that, but he had 30 to put into it. He bought that building. It had 11 tenants. They were paying $500 a month. It would cash flow easily, right? My payment was like $1,500 a month. And so I sat and talked to this brother, man, and I heard his story. He's since taken that property and it had a backside to it, put sweat equity into it, subdivided the bottom half of the building. Now it has 19 tenants and it's collecting over $10,000 in income, and it's cash flowing about $85,000 to $9,000 a month. He quit his job as a nurse and now he's managing his property. He's looking for his next property because, again, he lives in Danville. He knows that city. He had a plan. And the guy, in my assertion is, and I went to Danville to spend time with him to get to know him. That my counterparts wouldn't do that. They just see this Black guy come into the bank and make some assumptions on the surface based on what he looked like and who he was. He had some tattoos on him, and he's a brother, man. He's doing his thing. But he's also a nurse. He's smart. He saved money. And so my background in understanding the potential and possibility of anybody, but in particular, a brother that I feel like had himself together, I was able to tell the story and improve this guy and to get him his piece of real estate. And now he's looking to build an empire. But that's what I'm saying. But I hope that answers your question. Just potential, man.
That completely addresses it. That there's something significant to what used to be a norm when Black folks were completely excluded, basically, from getting loans and banking. I've heard it was some report I watched, and it was an older lady who was talking about, older white lady who was talking about in the 50s and 60s, how your bank was local. You walk in, you get to know somebody, you have a personal relationship, and a loan was nothing at the greatest interest rate that could be had because there was that relationship.
Yeah.
We're so disjointed that the relationship that you went and built and made sure was substantial enough for there to be a business investment in his endeavors is one that used to be had in the bank right down the street. But you went the extra mile for multiple reasons, but that is exactly what we need in spaces like that, representation and people who
Yes.
actually care about what's at stake. I see Bob has a question. I'm gonna throw something in the chat that speaks to kind of what Demetrius has just shared with us. How much exclusionary behaviors and racism have cost our country? It was 16 trillion in 2020. So because he allowed this young man to get involved and become someone to actually elevate our country and participate in this capitalist system, that was disrupted by what you did, Demetrius. But I'm going to put that in the chat for anybody interested. Go ahead, Bob.
So yeah, it used to be all of this kind of stuff was relationship based, and it was all character based. It was all a function of, you know, who you knew and what your relationship was and what the trust factors were and all of that sort of thing. I remember getting the first loan I ever got was walking into the bank in High Point, North Carolina, and talking with the banker that my father knew, and I just got the loan. That was just the way it was. Now we've moved into all of these system-based, factor-based, mathematically calculated kinds of things. But my question is this. We can argue, and it's argued oftentimes, that this kind of mathematical or algorithmic calculation is neutral. It's non-biased. And yet the measure of bias is really impact. And if we've got data that shows that there's bias based upon this method of doing things, why are we not able to break out of that method of doing things in favor of a way that demonstrates a non-negative impact to various groups of people? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. It's impact. It's not the calculation. It's not the method. It's not this or that. It's the impact. And we know from SAT scores, we know from credit scores, we know from all of these kinds of things that are classically used in the system that they're unfair, that they have disparate negative impact to various groups of people. And we know why they do. So why can't we abandon those methods in favor of non-negative impact methods?
I mean, Belton might answer that too. Some of it's money, like greed and opportunity, right? I mean, you know, I'll give you some examples in banking. So my bank branch on Bessemer Avenue collected the most fees out of any bank in the city of Greensboro. The other branches had interest income and other things that they were collecting money on, whether people had investments, whether people had larger deposits, so they can lend those deposits out to people at different spread ranges. But fee income is really the way you make money in banking. It's a cherry on the top. So my bank branch charged the most in overdraft fees, had the most ATM usage, right? Because people are riding the bus, they don't typically have transportation, they're walking to ATM, they get into ATM. Took in the most cash at the ATM because a lot of people had jobs where they were getting tips and things like that. But we had one client, and this wasn't an African American client, it was a Dominican family, Hispanic client. They were charged $100,000 1 year in overdraft fees, but because they couldn't borrow money from the bank, they couldn't get a loan. They owned and I've told you, if you're in Greensboro, if I told you the name, you know who they are, but they owned a grocery store in East Greensboro. And it cashed checks for people, it served the community in a lot of different ways. But because they couldn't borrow money from the bank, get a line of credit basically to cover those shortfalls day to day, they were on our overdraft list every day. And they just paid the overdraft fees. And I calculated one, it was $100,000 in overdraft fees. So some of it is because the bank can make money off of these individuals. You know, my branch also had the highest, there's a ratio we look at in banking of accounts that you pay no interest on, right? Non-interest bearing deposits. About 35 to 40% of my client base at my branch in East Greensboro had accounts that had no interest on their money. In contrast, you go to the other parts of town where people that have more money, they typically get more interest on their accounts. So your checking accounts, your free checking account, for example, has no interest. The bank's gonna give you an account. If you have a direct deposit, you get no interest. You basically getting a free account for your relationship. But you go to other bank branches where average balances of $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 in your checking account, the bank's gonna give you interest on that. The bank does not want to pay interest because there's margins, right? They lose money. So a branch like mine is very valuable, even though they're not offering all of the extra opportunities to those folks. They love the fact that those dollars are there to lend out at no cost to the bank. So I think that's one example, right? It could be many others, but for me, I think it's economics. I think it's money. I think that there's, you know, I mean, you look at it's a statistic about the unbanked and underbanked, right? So 15% of Americans are unbanked or underbanked. Unbanked means you have no banking account. Underbanked means you use these other alternatives in neighborhoods like check cashing places, pawn shops for loans. You use the rental places to get your furniture and electronics, right? You use the payday lenders to buy your car when you're paying them, you know, a certain amount every week, which ends up with multiples of the interest rate. It could be 100, 200% in interest rate. In the African-American community, 25% are unbanked. So you think that number combined underbanked, unbanked for all Americans is 15%, is 25% for unbanked, that's 1 in 4, and 45% for underbanked in the Black community. So now the question is, okay, why do we allow these predatory payday lenders? I mean, you think about, you can take your car title to a pawn shop. A pawn shop is supposed to be selling whatever it's selling. You can take your car title to a pawn shop because you need money for an emergency. We had clients that come into the bank that would pawn their cars to bury their relatives because they couldn't afford, you know, they come into the bank, want to borrow money because mom died unexpectedly. They can't get a $10,000 loan from the bank to bury their relatives, so they take their car to the pawn shop and give them a title, and they pawn their car. You know, now, can they pay that back? I don't know. But a lot of times people lost items because they didn't have access to the bank. So, you know, we can do a lot of things different. We can get rid of all of these. You know, you go to a rental place and buy furniture, and it's a $500 sofa, and it ends up costing you $2,000. That's, to me, that should be illegal. But again, there are political action groups, all kind of people that allow these different industries to exist because there's money involved. So that's my answer, Bob. Belton may have another one.
No, I'll just add really quickly.
No, I think it's a greed. Yeah. If you can,
exploitation.
It's exploitation. If you can, you can, and if you can, you will.
Yeah.
So that's what I was going to add really quickly before I get to, I'm guessing that's Lisa. Exploitation is rampant when it comes to money. We all know that. I mean, it's old as time. Whenever we decided to assign value to something, it became, how can I get something from somebody who may not be able to do anything about me taking it? One of the best examples is if you've had the opportunity to go to the International Civil Rights Museum, downtown Greensboro, this Coke machine, one side of it's 5 cents, the other side's 15 cents, and the 15-cent side or 10-cent side, whichever it is, it's more, was specifically for the Negro population. So this sharecropping, the list goes on and on. I mean, it was the exploitation of labor first, and then it became just an exploitation of almost anything you can attach to it. And you know, you guys know my focus is media, so it is even an exploitation of the Black image and culture.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
If I could,
but Bob, you kind of jumped ahead. You went to the last question, but I want Demetrius to be thinking about things that he sees he can do stuff about. Vanessa, I'm gonna turn everything around real quick. They had their hand up for a while, and then I'll come right to you, okay?
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Felton, and thank you, Demetrius, for presenting this. And a little shout out, Demetrius is my banker. And unfortunately, I had a negative experience with his former bank that the relationships does matter and they do devalue you. But my question for you is, what is the call to action to people to look for? Because even these, they smile and shine and you believe they are going to do you right. But how would I know? And I will also shout out my bookends are on here, my oldest child and my youngest child. Jeffrey and Lily are on here. So so they don't just hear it from me to take your money and run, leave there. But how do they know that they're not being treated right if these are people who are smiling and acting welcoming?
Yeah, you know, think about my first interaction with you. Like, you and your daughters came into the bank. I saw y'all come into the bank. I went out of my way to talk to you and I got to know you. We found a connecting point for my kids going to the same school. And I think that was, and I offered you the opportunity for me to come do literacy, to talk to other like-minded people. And then you invited me to the Go transportation thing. So I think some of it is being seen. You know, I remember I had this brother walk into a bank one time, the bank on Bessemer I managed. He was like, I'm closing my account. I didn't know him personally. He had opened his account, walked in, just met with a banker. I said, why? He said, I want to bank with a Black-owned bank. I said, okay. I said, where is there one here? So he named the bank. And I said, okay. I said, look up their board and look up the decision makers for that bank, right? So you making some assumptions based on something. I said, if I were you, man, I'd be wanting to bank with a Black banker. You know, that gets you somewhere close to where you're trying to get to, and somebody that understands you and understands your business and wants to really get to know you. So I think I did a talk at a CEO summit down at the Cultural Arts Center last month for a friend of mine. And she, one of the things my talk was about for entrepreneurs, and it was part of my talk was interviewing your banker, right? This relationship is an at-will relationship, right? It's not like, you know, you're at the behest of the bank and the banker can tell you, you know, you can go bank wherever you want to bank. It's like churches on every corner and restaurants on every corner. You can go. So I think one thing you do is you interview your banker and you make sure the person that you are doing business with understands the needs that you have, understands historically some of the things that may have been challenges for you and can help you get to where you want to go. So one thing I do when I meet with clients, my first appointment is for an hour. You're not gonna come in. I'm not gonna come in. You're not gonna come in here. We're gonna start a loan application. We're not gonna open. Felton can tell you that. Me and Felton sat down. We probably talked for an hour and a half. You know, because I want to get to know you, and I want you to get to know me to make sure that our you know, our goals align. You know, that I can take you to where you're trying to go. Right. It's not just a transaction. I'm a relationship builder. So I think the biggest thing is you want to be with somebody. I tell people all the time, man. People don't bank with Pinnacle. They bank with Demetrius. And so when I'm talking to somebody about making a change or thinking about where they bank, the first question I ask them is, who's your banker? 99% of people can't tell me. They say Wells Fargo, Bank of America, whatever. They say the bank name, but they can't tell me that person that they bank with. A lot of reasons because banking turnover is pretty high. And he was bounced from bank to bank. And so I think the relationship is critical. And I think somebody that's really interested in you and what your goals are is the key. So interview them.
Well said, well said. Vanessa, I'm coming to you, and then Ajane, I see your hand up. I'll come to you. Vanessa.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the comment that you made, Felton, with regard to putting the amount of financial or fiscal loss for the entire country into perspective so that people understand that it's not a me thing, it's not a you thing, it's a we thing. Because this type of discrimination obviously hurts everybody. And sometimes, you know, people can't scream or won't scream unless the rocker's on their foot. And so with that being said, I mean, kind of to piggyback on, you know, what Bob was, you know, talking about and what he was saying, when we're asking ourselves, you know, again, where is my cog in this wheel? What is my due diligence and my responsibility for speaking out or trying to change the status quo? Certainly, I agree. You know, much of it is financial, but the reality is that for people who, and it's not saying that that's not, you know, correct, because absolutely it is. But I think another part of that is that for people who don't have power, whether that's, you know, socioeconomic power or you know, power in their communities and who really traditionally don't have a voice, they're the ones that are most impacted. In other words, there's a disparate impact. And so for all of those folks that are rallying against DE&I efforts and what they think they mean and all of these other kinds of things, it's really unfortunate, because the reality is that many of those individuals that are being impacted positively will many times take on the mantra that, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. In other words, they refuse to acknowledge their advantage in a system that summarily and disproportionately impacts people in other races or ethnicities of folk. And so, you know, I just think it's important to, you know, to call out what you see and to oftentimes to not sugarcoat it, because that's what it is. In other words, I know it's broken, but if as long as it's not, you know, affecting me in a negative way, if this works in my favor, then I'm not willing to step outside of my comfort zone or to do anything different in order to change a system that obviously impacts me and my family in a positive way. And so when you know, we put that to people in that way, you know, without sugarcoating it and without giving them the nice, you know, fluffy words, you know, it does oftentimes call upon people, you know, put your money where your mouth is. And if you're saying that you acknowledge it, or that these things, that there's truth to the science and the data that does not lie, then you have a duty and an obligation to try to do something about it. If you're not, then, you know, recognize it for what it is, and you're comfortable with that. You're comfortable with the racism or the prejudice or the disparate outcomes that affect so many people throughout this country. But as Felton put it, it affects all of us. People just think that sometimes miss that big picture. And so, you know, that's unfortunately one of the things that we live with. And so, you know, I am so glad that I had an opportunity to kind of call in today. I appreciate Demetrius, you giving your personal experience, because yeah, I've had people, you know, stand in line to give me money when they thought I had some, or recognize that on paper I had, you know, a rental property or something that could potentially benefit them should I decide to take out a loan or whatnot. But, you know, during a pandemic, when my husband was struggling and dealing with PTSD and trying to get his military benefits lined up, and like most families, we were reshuffling to try to make sure that our mortgage was paid and our children didn't drop out of school, then all of a sudden the numbers mattered. And, you know, these types of things that were barriers to being able to get short-term loans and whatnot. And so, yeah, calling it out for what it is. And I appreciate the work that you're doing, Demetrius. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, in line with that, that's why voting and knowing your legislators are important, and putting the right people in place. You know, whatever you think about Elizabeth Warren, I mean, regardless of what you think about her, is my point. She created the CFPB, pushed really hard for that group to be formed after 2008 crisis. And a lot of what that group did through the Dodd-Frank Act was create like 400 plus bills that really negatively impact banks' revenue opportunities. And it stopped a lot of the practices and slowed those things down. One of them was some of the unfair mortgage practices that created what the banks were dealing with, what the banks were benefiting from, and these mortgage-backed securities and all that stuff during that early 2000 and late 90s period of house property values increasing, you know, 6-8% per year, and the appraisals that were done by you know, not objective appraisals and all these other kind of things. So I know Maxine Waters has been huge in pushing against the banks, and bankers don't like either one of them. To your point, as in they don't like either one of them, because they're speaking up for the whole person, not just part of the electorate. So I think that's a huge component to it too.
All right. Thanks for that wonderful comment, Vanessa, and sharing some of your personal story. Ajane, coming to you next. I see your hand up.
Sorry, I was taking notes. I had to shuffle. Good afternoon, everyone. Ponder, I wanted to really first say that I'm so grateful for the work that you do. I know it has probably cost you so much time and effort, and sometimes heartbreak and disappointment, but I do want to reassure you that you are necessary and very vital. And so I'm so grateful for everything that you're doing. And on your days where you feel like maybe this ain't working, it is working for real. It's working, and you just keep your mind on that because you're working it out for us. My question is kind of two-part, but I'm going to try to simplify it. I want to know if there are organizations for Black bankers where you all are able to come together and not only get reprieve, but to build out strategies for how you all are impacting Black communities and teaching this information.
I don't know of one.
Okay, that's
I
why
mean,
I
you
was
know, you got like Black chambers and organizations like that where you can kind of network and meet people. I know some Black bankers that I've met throughout my career. Not many, but a few of us, and we'll do lunch. The interesting thing is I don't know two at one bank. I know one at Truist, I know one at First Bank, I know one at First Citizens, I know one at, it's kind of like that because there's not that many of us. I mean, in the rooms I walk in, even at the bank I'm at now, when I have a meeting of vice presidents and kind of local leadership, of the 60 or 70 people in the room, it's like maybe 3 of us. So yeah, that's not a reason why we shouldn't have something like that. I think we just organically connected and kind of formed a Voltron, but it's not by a name or title or something. We just try to connect when we can.
Okay.
Maybe cities like Atlanta that are larger that maybe have more of there may be something like that going on down there, but it's not that I know.
Okay. I'm going to send you an email because I have more thoughts.
Okay.
Thank you, Felton, for letting me ask the question.
Oh yeah. And I owe you a phone call. I'm sorry, yesterday got away from me. But anybody else have anything they wanted to add? Because I have the wrap-up question that I'm hopeful expands upon Bob's first question, because you're in the world. But if anybody has anything else they want to ask, please feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to ask what I think is the final boss question. Demetrius, what is actually possible? And I might have something in the chat. Let's see. I'm not sure. Okay. It was just a compliment. Karen, good to know that you're on here. It's been too long. We'll get together soon, but she's thanking you. What is actually possible, and where can we actually go? Now, this is a little bit more in depth, I think, than the broad observational, 20 feet in the air view. You're in the world, you're in the space. What else besides what you shared, which has been great, and we are so appreciative, but what else do you think is possible? What can we actually do? What can we actually see done by someone like yourself, functioning in economics, finance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to, as they asked about a Black banker consortium, right? I think we need to, number one, when we see Black bankers, bank with them, encourage them, help them, navigate the spaces that they're in. There are a lot of people that come into this industry out of college and they don't stay long because they're not seen. I think, as they said this, that I've sacrificed, I've forfeit some opportunity to stay where I am. I had a mentor who was really encouraging me to go to the Ivory Tower over in Winston-Salem, which is where BB&T was headquartered, and I wouldn't do it. And I told him, he was a great guy. His name's Louis Lobo. He was president of the American Banking Association for a while and a giant in banking. And I just told him, I was like, man, I got to be out here in the streets, man. Like, I can't help people if I'm not in front of them, right? So I think when you see folks in this industry that are Black and even other minority groups, man, you gotta support them. You gotta bank with them. You gotta encourage them. You gotta invite them into your spaces. I do a lot of financial talks, a lot of financial literacy stuff. A lot. Sometimes too much, but I just that's kind of how I'm built. And so my grandma told me, give it all away. You can't take it with you, So I do that. And so I think you got to invite people into your churches, into your nonprofits, into your whatever group you're a part of, and give them exposure to other people. Because I get excited when I can help somebody that looks like me. I just know the impact it's making for their children and grandchildren, right? That's how we build that generational wealth, man. It's not just giving somebody a loan, like it's giving them knowledge. Because if they got the knowledge, they can get along, right? Even if they can't get it from this source, they'll find another source, they'll understand the system, and they'll set themselves up to get it. So I think that's huge. I think we gotta force some policy change. All these political action groups have access to these politicians, and banking is a huge. And I used to get an email every year about the bank PAC at the banks I worked at. Do you want to contribute to this PAC? And I never did because I understood exactly what that was, right? So we got to be, HR 40 has been hung up for forever, right? Forever. I mean, even the committee to study reparations, they won't even pass that. So I think we got to demand better from the people we elect. They need to know what we stand for, and not just nationally but locally. And Felton knows that. Just trying to participate himself in the local process. We got a lot of people that say they represent us, but they don't. Whether it's because of intention before they go in as represent us and they get into that pot and money starts flowing and the power, or they don't go in with the right intentions. Like the guy we got that's trying to be our governor right now. So I think we got to make sure we got the right people in places of power that represent us and that understand the things that impact our communities positively. We got to teach literacy though, man. It's huge. It's got to start in our schools. I spent a lot of time, not in colleges, not in high schools, but I'm in middle schools, talking to kids. And I'm just surprised at what they don't know, right? So we got to make sure that we start at an early age, helping our people understand that we can't just be consumers, right? Because the American system set up for us to consume. We spend more money than any other group. We spend the equivalent of what some countries' gross national domestic product is, because it's targeted toward us. Whether it's shoes and hair and nails and cars and people buying cars and don't own a house and they're putting hundreds of dollars a month into. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong being fly. You know what I'm saying? Like that's part of the Black American experience too. Like the style of the world is what we say it is, right? But we also got to do it in the right context and do it when it's time, right? So you can delay gratification and do something when it's time and really be shining because you got it, as opposed to doing it because you're trying to look a certain way, like you got it. So some of that stuff, man. Wealth building generation. We got to be investing in the market. We got to understand the market, and not think investing in the stock market is like buying a lottery ticket. That's not the same, But again, there's these ways we think that's been kind of put into us. We've been programmed a certain way. And some of that's just because, when you don't have something for so long and the floodgates open and the opportunity looks like it's in front of you, it's fool's gold, because it really ain't much to it. It's not appreciating asset, it's depreciating. But you think, okay, I get this car and I'm living in an apartment. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying, like, it's a proportion, right? Does it make sense to go buy a new car when, maybe you need to be looking at something different? So I just think mindset, different ways of thinking, making sure the people who represent us are making decisions that help us, getting that financial information out to everybody. You showing up, you don't have to be a banker. It's a whole bunch of guys out there. The FDIC has a whole financial literacy program from kindergarten to the older folks. And you show up and call me if you need somebody to show up with you, but just supporting Black businesses, right? I mean, we got to make sure we circulate our dollars in our communities. A lot of people that come into our communities and take dollars to the other side of town, they own business in East Greensboro, but they live in the western part of the city. All those folks really helping us, So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's just some practical.
No, man, that was a well framed, and you answered it in multiple ways, and I'll just expound briefly, and I'm going to give you the last word. But representation matters. We'll be talking about some of that tonight, but you can't just expect a vote. That is not how this is supposed to work. It's supposed to be earned. So what is in this for me? The policy piece is critically important. Good representation, quality representation that prioritizes the individual and the collective is extremely important. So I appreciate you highlighting that. There's these elements to addressing the problem that will require us to actually look at truth as opposed to fiction. You guys know one of my favorite works I've probably recommended to most of you on here is MLK's Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos of Community. And in that work, he is highlighting this fascination with material things that is disruptive to a collective understanding of our shared humanity. Above all else in this space, and if you guys haven't heard me say it before, it is about the collective. I can't do what I do here without acknowledging the least of us in this conversation. That's why it always skews towards Black American experience, but that is a part of the collective. That is about everyone. That 16 trillion we just talked about, if you want to put a dollar sign on it, that's it.
Yeah.
And it affects us all. We're all connected. I shared humanity as the priority of this work for me. Anybody have anything they want to add? Demetrius, I'm going to give you the last word. So William posted some information in the chat that you guys might be interested in. Vanessa says, take your money and run. I love that. So thank you to the person who said that collectively we have power as a community. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Demetrius, take us home, man. What's your final thought?
I'm on this home ownership thing now. I'm on this steering committee for the city of Greensboro. I'm actually having lunch Friday with the guy that neighborhood development director for the city, and I've been in some talks with Michelle Kennedy, who's over housing for the city. We got to find a way to make sure that the waiting list for housing, even if you have a voucher in Greensboro, is hundreds of people long. There's people sleeping in cars all over the city. There's safe places. Actually, the IRC tried to create a safe place and connect with some churches to have people sleeping in their cars safely with security and access to restrooms and showers in the morning. Housing is really, and it's always been the thing, right? Think about this place. It was not white folks, I say ours, but it wasn't theirs. They came and took it, and it created the wealthiest nation in the world, right? Because they were able to acquire this land and use this land to produce, and they use free labor to do it. So home ownership is critical. We gotta get ourselves into owning assets that appreciate in value, that set up opportunities for our children and our grandchildren. I see people passing homes on, passing real estate on, and it's just, you know, it's passive income, it's all kind of stuff. So we got to get into, so I'm really pushing for housing, affordable, helping people get access to places that are safe and secure to live. You know, if you got some stability, you know, you can do some things. But if you transit, you're moving around, if you don't know, all that stuff matters. So that's my next lane I'm in. I'm really pushing the affordable housing thing.
Well, you got some good appreciative comments in the chat and some hand claps on the screen. You definitely get one from me. I'm grateful. And part of what you said, man, is us doing and introducing and working together. And this was a part of that for me. We're gonna talk offline because you kind of brought me around to something you mentioned a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you remember what that was, but we're gonna talk offline, and I'm gonna be more focused on making sure my relationship with Demetrius Ponder is solid. And I know he has my best interest and my community's best interest, which is all of us at his heart in his work. So I'm grateful. Appreciate you being here, man. Again, you guys some really good compliments in the chat.
Thank you.
So thank you, man.
Yeah.
We'll catch up soon enough. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay dry, and I'll see some of you tonight. Y'all take care.
Bye. Thank you.